If I were to ask you to name every RPG on the Super Nintendo, you'd probably get pretty far down the list before remembering Shadowrun, if you even remember it at all. But Shadowrun was indeed an RPG, albeit one that didn't fit the Final Fantasy mold that defined the genre on consoles. Instead of Japanese high fantasy and sweeping epics, we had dark, gritty, moody, violent, nihilistic, urban, cyberpunk sleaze with a sprinkling of fantasy thrown in. Quite the oddity, and no doubt something that had Nintendo of America tugging on its collar in the pre-ESRB days. And if you want to get extra hoity-toity about it, you could say Shadowrun's DNA contains more RPG than any Final Fantasy game ever did, as it spun off of the Shadowrun tabletop role-playing game first released in 1989. Yeah, tabletop role-playing. Shit I knew absolutely nothing about prior to starting this review. So, naturally, I had to pick up a beginner box and get myself versed in it a little bit because, goddammit, you guys deserve every morsel of context I could possibly squeeze out of this intellectual property. And what can I say? How about, man, that's a lot to get into. And it's going to take a bit of reading and a lot of persuading in order to get a proper game going. But it did give me a good primer on the world of Shadowrun, which is key info to present in this review. Shadowrun takes place in what you would call an alternate future where corporations have been granted excessive unchecked power, leading to mass exploitation and civil war as North America gets carved up into various factions. If that isn't enough, the Mesoamerican long count calendar ends, which ushers in the Awakening, or the return of magic. Dragons also appear, as well as elves and dwarves who are born to regular humans seemingly at random. Some people also get goblinized, meaning they morph into trolls or orcs. Add on top of that a few deadly viruses, a few computer crashes, and a bunch more mutations due to Halley's Comet of all things, and we get this super crazy world. Really, it sounds like they designed the world first and then had to stretch their brain to invent all the crazy shit that happened between now and then in order to explain how it could have possibly come to be. They could have just been like, the future but with dragons, deal with it, if it were only a video game, but for tabletop gamers, I guess that wouldn't fly. But I'm here to review the game for the Super Nintendo, so let's do that. Shadowrun was developed by Beam Software, published by Data East, and first hit the market in 1993 after a tumultuous development cycle. Since it's an RPG, you can bet the story is getting factored into the final score, and for this one they took inspiration from the very first Shadowrun novel titled Never Deal with a Dragon. You can read this little blurb here in the pre-title screen, but it won't give you much insight into the Shadowrun universe. All you need to know at first is that it's 2050 and your character Jake Armitage has just been gunned down by a motley gang. Prior to being hauled off, however, a shape-shifting fox lady casts a mysterious spell on your corpse. Upon starting a new game, you wake up in a morgue and roll off the slab with no memory of what happened, and I gotta say, that's one hell of a great way to set the mood. Already we're dripping in neo-noir nihilism, and I'm loving it. As you progress through the game, you walk the Seattle streets, entering seedy bars and clubs, talking to denizens, all while piecing together who wanted you dead and why. You soon gain the ability to hack into cyberspace, aka the Matrix, which trickles more info your way via the data files you extract. It's in this way you learn that you are a data courier, carrying a piece of software in your head that's meant to destroy a malevolent AI. This AI is fiercely protected by a shadowy corporation aided by a mysterious figure known as Drake. What, are you expecting a joke here or something? And while there are many elements of the game that borrow from classic cyberpunk tropes, keep in mind that this game came out in 1993, before some of the more recent affiliations of words like The Matrix, and AI, and Grindr, and no. But hey, the internet didn't even really take off until 1993, so all this cyberspace stuff here was pretty cutting edge. Now, when I play an RPG, I really appreciate the moment-to-moment elements of world building and immersion, and you get a good amount of that with Shadowrun. Plot points like here, when you need to take a boat across the Puget Sound, but you can't because mermaids are clustering near the city, attracted to the warmth of the sewage runoff. That's like a really interesting portrayal of mermaids. Everywhere, really, you get this injecting of fantasy elements into a bleak urban hell, which makes for a truly unique juxtaposition. In how many games can you hack into a vampire's computer and steal their cash? Or find the last boss's phone number on a data file and call him up to talk shit? Oh my god, this part had me laughing. You're just like, hey Drake, what do you know about dogs? And he's just on the other end getting mad like, brrr! It's also how I found out he was an actual dragon too, which is hilarious. I want to bring up other sections like this part where a sketchy street doc tries to fix the data jack in your head, only to accidentally trigger the timer on a Cortex bomb. You're then given 30 minutes to find a proper clinic that can neutralize it. or getting trapped in the car yards and the only way out is to pay or fight the King, a self-imposed ruler of the area. My god, these plot elements feel pretty fresh even by today's standards, so they must have felt really ahead of their time back when Shadowrun first came out. And the dialogue certainly sparkles and in some cases borders on straight up bizarre. Everyone is just so idiosyncratic and odd, from the busy citizens blowing you off to the jester spirit's creepy nursery rhyme to this weapon shop owner encouraging everyone to light their hair on fire. And if you're wondering, yeah, this does predate the Beavis and Butthead controversy, which probably explains why it didn't get the axe, but word on the street is there was a much more explicit version of this game that Nintendo of America had to whittle down because it was just too dark and violent and sexual. Apparently the guys at the morgue were called the Chop Shop guys, and even in the clean version we know these ladies walking the street ain't just ladies walking the street. My only qualm about the story is how it all wraps up. Spoiler alert here, but after uploading your head program and blowing up the AI, a cutscene plays where you take out whoever the hell this is and fly away on a chopper. That's it. Apparently they really were working on a time crunch when making this game, so I have to imagine that this sad, rushed ending was a result of that. But story-wise, I'm gonna say this one's a winner. The world, the dialogue, the events, all great top-tier stuff that really had me engaged. But that doesn't mean anything if the design sucks, and I'm happy to report that it doesn't, really. You can consider Shadowrun as something of an open world as you meander around Seattle, exploring different areas and unlocking different sections of the game, all in this isometric view. Interacting with things is done in a surprising way. You actually stop moving and bring up a cursor to select what you want to interact with, which is a pretty bold move for a console game. This gives everything a very PC game feel, and I have a few thoughts I can get into in the gameplay section. But yeah, if you want to talk to this guy, for example, just bring up the cursor, navigate it over to him, and select Talk, which you're going to need to do a lot since conversation plays a big role. But thankfully these interactions are a little more robust than those found in your usual run-of-the-mill RPG. As you talk to people, you learn key words which get added to this list of things you can ask people about. Asking the right people about the right thing can advance the plot or give interesting insight. And while this may seem amazing at first, it becomes clear that most NPCs are just programmed to respond to 2 or 3 things you can ask about, giving a generic response to all others. You also fight, of course, and that's also done with a cursor. Bring up the targeting reticle and drag it over to who you want to shoot. It locks on to most enemies, so you don't have to maneuver it too much, which is a godsend. Once you're locked on, just hammer on the shoot button. Interestingly, the part of the body you target and how far away you are from the enemy is irrelevant. Shooting a foot from across the screen has the same effect as shooting a face point blank. It's really your equipment and stats that determine the damage you do, as well as how much damage is done to you. And you can customize this to some degree. Weapon shops sell guns that fire faster, hit harder, or have higher accuracy. There's armor also that adds levels of protection, as well as cyberware like boosted reflexes, which up your firing rate. Plus, you can level up by visiting beds and pumping karma into these different skills. Karma, by the way, is experience points you earn from killing enemies. The beds also heal you and allow you to save, making them very, very important assets to track down. Unsurprisingly, there's magic in the game as well. You can learn 6 spells total by gathering items throughout the city and bringing them to this dog. The magic is cast exactly like shooting and selecting, but you can only equip 1 spell at a time, and you cannot cast magic from the menu screen, which is a bummer. Each individual spell can be leveled up, as can your overall magic attribute, upping your MP. Now, a really cool addition to this game is the ability to enlist some hired guns to help you out on your quest. Shadowrun, the tabletop game, is anything but a solo adventure, so it would have been weird to have you walking around Seattle alone here. These hired guns are called Shadowrunners, so yeah, that's where the name comes from. Couldn't leave them out. You can hire only 1 at the beginning, but by building up your charisma, you can hire up to 3, which feels great skulking around the streets with your small army, and feels weird getting a hotel room. Oh, you guys are gonna... Okay, yeah. They can be found at bars and clubs, and they don't come cheap, but you can lower their fee by building up your negotiation skill. And when they join your team, they can bring all sorts of different skills and abilities that can make up for what you're lacking. You can even give them weapons and armor, as well as tell them where to go and who to target. Furthermore, they even built out little scenarios when certain Shadowrunners are present for certain events, like here where this mage betrays you about halfway up Drake Tower. Cool. After a while they leave, but you can keep them around longer by building up your leadership skill. Awesome addition, but if you could hire CPU buddies, I can't help but wonder why they didn't allow for a second player. Maybe the extra cursor would just slow things to a crawl. Who knows? And the last thing to go over in design is the Matrix. Whoa, slow down, it's not that cool. Anytime you find a computer, there's a good chance you could hack it, which takes you into this alternate top-down cyberspace scenario that's like a mix of Chip's Challenge and Minesweeper. And it sucks! Worst of all, you can die in it, which feels super shitty. Like if you could somehow die picking a lock in Skyrim. A successful hack will give you money, a data shard, or activate an external object. All in all, pretty ambitious when you think about it. They set up some pretty wicked dominoes with this design. Now, let's get into gameplay to see how they fall. Well, they fall a little slappily. I always like to start the gameplay section off by getting into the controls, and from a button perspective, it's fine. B brings up your interact cursor, A your crosshairs, and X your magic cursor. Don't mess those up. Y is a quick menu item, while Start is your menu proper. Select gives you a quick glance at your team's health, which I discovered way too late. The shoulder buttons perform various action shortcuts and are really appreciated. Moving in the isometric view would be weird if the movement were more demanding. Pressing down doesn't actually make you go down, but rather down and to the left. Actually going down requires you to hold down right. But you're not doing any dicey platforming and there aren't any edges to fall off of, so it's a bit awkward at worst. Now, using the D-pad to control an on-screen cursor to select or attack things can be a right pain in the ass, as it always is anytime any game makes you do it. There's always a moment of helplessness when the enemies immediately start firing on you while you take the time to amble your crosshairs over to them. It almost feels like every enemy in every encounter gets first strike, which feels really unsatisfying. The fights just feel like chaos, really. They aren't turn-based and they don't involve any finesse, just standing there and shooting while taking hits. Heading for cover is pointless because you'd have to realign your cursor if you wanted to shoot again. And there are times when you're shooting the other guy and they're shooting you, and for some reason your respective stats are preventing any damage from being done, and you're just there like, hey man, what are we even doing here anyways? I mentioned earlier how you can't use magic in the menu screen, and this is consequential because it is possible for enemies to stun lock you. Nothing is worse than holding your hand up ready to cast heal, but you can't because you're just continuously taking damage. I do think this was by design though. Also, as cool as it is to storm Drake's tower with an army, get ready for some slowdown. Even after the enemies die, their bodies and dropped cash litter the screen, keeping things slow and painful. The good news is you can mitigate this by not hiring any Shadowrunners, and you don't actually need to hire any Shadowrunners to actually beat Shadowrun, which is actually kind of a knock against the game when you think about it. Like, I want the dudes you hire to be more helpful. I want it to be worth my while to buy them gear and equip them. I want it to be worthwhile to move them around in a fight and strategically position them, but really all of it is unnecessary. Looking at the game as a whole, you do get the feeling like they set it up to be bigger than it really is. Shit, you don't actually start using magic until a third of the way in, and computer hacking really is only important near the end. Oh, and let me tell you, earning money, or new yen as it's called, is really unbalanced. First off, almost everything is insanely expensive. This gun is 40,000 new yen, and this guy just dropped 10 bucks. There are insane windfall moments though, like in the arena or hacking computers, but once you've exhausted those, grinding can take an insanely long time. And give me more beds! There are 3 in the game. 3! It is often the case that you will be deep into a level and then think, I really should heal and save. So you have to friggin' extract yourself all the way back to the streets to find a bed to do so. Because if you don't and you die, you have to do everything all over again. And let me tell you, there are some shit deaths. Clearing floors of enemies only to die hacking a computer? Shit death. Thinking you're safe and then getting trolled by a literal troll walking out of the elevator and stun locking you? Shit death. Running out of heal and getting pot-shotted on the long way back by these guys right before you reach the bed? Shit death. Put beds in the dungeons. I'm sure some desk jockey in a Niki tower built a crash pad at a janitor closet somewhere. I also want to level an all-too-common complaint for SNES RPGs. You will often have no idea what to do next, and hints are minimal, bordering on non-existent. Sometimes it's even a matter of not even noticing something that could be interacted with, like this gate or these buttons. Other times it's not selecting a specific dialogue option with a specific person, and sometimes it's downright egregious, like during this fight with the Jester Spirit. You're somehow expected to have the prescience to use the interaction cursor to talk to him in the middle of a goddamn firefight. Death is approaching, and it's 15 minutes of backtracking to the nearest bed. Do not hit us with a brain tickler right now, please! I think this game was made this opaque because it was expected that you would pick it up and spend literally months edging your way through it, not trying to plow through it in a weekend like I did. But if you want to play this, I implore you to use a strategy guide. It actually makes for a better experience. About 2 hours into going guideless, I said, screw this, and went online to read that the shades were sitting on a table in my apartment the whole time. So, I would say the gameplay is the weakest aspect of Shadowrun. It could be irritating, but thankfully never truly awful. time for graphics. Now, as the Super Nintendo's probably only true cyberpunk game, this game needed to put out some spectacle, and well, it tried. So much of the game is incredibly zoomed out, to such a degree that you don't really get to see all the detail in the world around you. It would have been better if they made things a little more close quarters, especially since distance counts for nothing in combat. You're often walking across these long, blank stretches of flat color or tiled patterns. Walking into the cage for a concert and seeing it so empty like this is off-putting. And while I know cyberpunk is supposed to be drab and gritty, sometimes it's just plain gross. The car yards are just a hideous section of the game. But there are some environments like the bars, the office towers, and the Rust Stiletto hideout that feel more close quarters and alive, even when you see little tile-set oopsies like this flipped graffiti. Jake's sprite probably would be a lot cooler if we can get a little closer and get more detail, because there's nothing really to comment on otherwise. The sprites running around are for the most part varied enough, which is good since the combat ones need to be shown from all 8 sides. One thing that stood out like crazy though is how they all look exactly the same after dying. Really makes you think. Male or female, orc or human, we all become the same thing when we die. A dude in brown pants lying face down. They treated us to a few big bad enemies like the Nagas here, and of course Drake, but honestly they're here and they're gone. It almost feels like a waste to see them only once given how big the game is. However, we need to find the person responsible for making this drummer dude because, oh man, they need to write a book on how to animate drummers in video games. Look, seriously, there is more personality in this tiny sprite than in any drummer from any iteration of Guitar Hero or Rock Band that has ever existed. Now, I'm gonna say they made a real good call by including headshots in the conversation sections of Shadowrun. If you're gonna be zoomed out for 80% of the game, you need to pull it in real close for the rest, and by doing so, we get a lot more character. And it really seems like they didn't have any guardrails around the graphical style they chose, because we get everything from this guy to friggin' this guy. Dude looks like Rodney Bombaclat Dangerfield. But it's great. You even get a good look at Jake during each conversation, even if his emotional range is limited to glasses or no glasses. You can see they gave him a real grimacy anti-hero look. He kind of looks like William Sadler, actually. And as cheesy as these transition scenes are, they do help with immersion. Yeah, that is indeed the face you're making the 700th time you ride that monorail. And lastly, I need to mention the cyberspace sections because, well, you know what I'm going to say. Look at this and tell me we're not looking at a 1 a.m. homework assignment. Ugh. Also, as a weird aside, look what the Japanese version of the game got when you killed the AI at the end. Wow. Why didn't we get that? Why make an asset like that and just leave it out? Anyways, graphics, hit or miss. Let's do audio. Hey, whoa, don't get too comfortable. I know what you're thinking. RPG, this thing's gonna have a massive soundtrack. Well, no. Somehow I got the impression that a robust soundtrack wasn't a priority here. And I'll jump right to the biggest offender to prove my point, and that's the music for Downtown. Okay, alright, we're downtown. It's the bustling sound of commerce. An upbeat pop number evokes the glitzy advertisements and flashy allure of consumerism, but because downtown is something of a hub that extends to most other areas, they decided to just extend the song to those other areas as well, which include the docks, the Rust Stiletto's hideout, the Vampire Mansion, the Rat Shaman's lair, Drake's Tower, and Aniki Tower, not to mention the ship in Bremerton and Drake's Volcano lair, which are all physically different areas entirely. And just so you know, that's all the dungeons. Yes, all of them. I would wager that this bloody song is playing for over 50% of the game. Seriously, just drop the needle on a YouTube playthrough and you'll probably land on this song. And for such a cheesy-ass song, it can really be grating. However, I'd be remiss not to mention that they actually included a main menu option to turn off the background music, which suggests to me that they knew people would get annoyed by this, but ugh, anyways. Moving along to the next most frequent song you'll hear, and that's the battle music. Yeah, nothing to write home about here, and really I wanted to complain about how they also kinda got lazy by not making separate battle music for the big boss fights like the Jester Spirit or Drake. RPG boss music is absolutely a thing. Everywhere except in this game, apparently. One aspect of the game that does get more than one song is when you're talking to someone. You get this number for regular conversations with regular dudes. And you get this one for more serious, dire, mysterious, or profound conversations. And even by just having 2 different songs, the impact is huge. Running into the dog for the first time is wonderfully unsettling. I'm going to drop a bit more praise and talk about the music that plays at the Wastelands Club in the Cage. Absolutely the banger of the soundtrack, and a great accompaniment for the Maria Mercurial concert. And our drummer friend, of course. And if you know me, you know I like understated minimalist numbers, which means I actually appreciated the bubbling subliminal sounds when you're decking into the Matrix. Looks bad, sounds good. There are probably about 6 more songs in the game other than the ones I've mentioned, which is a real bummer though. And if music wasn't a priority, then sound effects certainly weren't a priority. You get very, very little here. A handful of weapon and spell sounds, a dog bark, and the same scream when everyone dies. Yeah, this game has its own Wilhelm scream that, like the dead body sprite, transcends species and gender. They did make sure to include a ticking sound for the Cortex bomb section, which I'll accept, immersion and all that, but audio doesn't score too high, I'm afraid. Which means we're rounding the bend and it's time to talk value. Okay, kids, if we're talking about whether to pick up Shadowrun today, a few things need to be considered. 1, it's one of the pricier games for the console at around $70 USD. This doesn't put it out of reach per se, but it sure disqualifies it from being a quick pickup. But it's a great item to have in your collection, what with it being such a curious title and arguably the only cyberpunk game in the SNES library. It's also going to give you a good 10 to 15 hours of playtime and way more if you choose not to look anything up on the internet. And they didn't release it or re-release it anywhere else. This is your only official way to play it, which ups its value score by a large margin. Now, you may be like, wait, I've definitely seen that name on other consoles, and you're right, but every single other game that bears the name Shadowrun is completely different. This one was the first, but the following year, a Genesis version came out that was done by a completely different developer, and it looked like this. Now, I haven't played it, so I'm not going to get too deep into comparing the games, but everyone who's played it says that this version is pretty awesome, and indeed it does look pretty great, especially the cyberspace sections. It's kind of an apples to oranges situation if you're to compare them, so rather than picking one out as being better, just play both if you're a fan of the franchise. They also released a Japan-only Shadowrun for the Sega CD in 1996, which seems odd until you realize that it's a visual novel, a fact which all but eliminated its potential for Western appeal. The franchise was resurrected at various points, starting in 2007 with yet another game simply called Shadowrun, but this one was an online deathmatch first-person shooter similar to Counter-Strike. Yeah, real weird genre to come back with, and it kind of stinks of 2000s era Xbox if I'm being honest. Not really a fan of any of this, so let's move on to Shadowrun Returns, Shadowrun Dragonfall, and Shadowrun Hong Kong. All games used an isometric tactical RPG style that most closely resembles the Super Nintendo version. This definitely was for the fans, as it originated from Kickstarter, and it's worth checking out if you still dig Shadowrun after all these years. Finally, there was Shadowrun Chronicles Boston Lockdown, and I say was because it was an online game whose servers have long been shut down. But all this to say that the SNES version is one of a kind, so value it accordingly. So, a bit of a roller coaster of ups and downs with this one, but we gotta give it a score, and I'm settling on 6.8 out of 10. My god, I love the story and atmosphere, but I cannot forgive some of the annoying gameplay. Everything else about it's just fine. Definitely a niche pickup for curious collectors. Have fun.